Hi guys, so today's video is my second autobiographical video, and this one is going to jump slightly. Sorry, I'm trying to keep things as chronological as possible. This one is going to jump slightly, but it'll make sense. So, I'm going to start where I left off. I talked about in the previous video, basically the first 2 years of my life. So we're going to continue from there. When I was 3 years old, I started attending daycare. It was actually few hours per morning for a few mornings a week. If that makes sense. And it was actually for socialization because I was the youngest kid on the block. The rest of the kids were in school by the time I came along. So the rest of the kids grew up playing with one another on the street, whereas I missed out on that. So my mom put me in this daycare, and I didn't have, or no one, I should say, no one had concerns about me at daycare. The only person who said anything about me at that age was a worker who was actually at the house working with my brother, and I was standing in a corner spinning, and he made a comment about that behavior and about autism, but that never went anywhere because my diagnosis, for one thing, didn't exist at the time. So he was really the only one to express concern. At daycare, no one expressed concern about my behavior. And I remember a little bit playing with the other kids, and I think I probably came across pretty typical still at that point. And I stayed at that daycare. It was called We Care. I refer to it as We Don't Care, and I'm comfortable saying this because it's no longer there. I think the person might have retired. I call it We Don't Care because there were the cups they would give us to drink out of at snack and lunch had like green rings in the bottom. The staff were mean. They would, for example, threaten to make you clean the floor with a toothbrush. I never did, but the closest I came was when I was 7, and I jammed something in a pencil sharpener. And I remember the toilets in the girls' bathroom were always clogged, so they would tell us to use the boys' bathroom. And the reason I believe it was a poor quality center is because it was what's called, where I live, it's called a for-profit center. So there's literally one person at the top whose pockets are being lined, whereas a not-for-profit center, all of the money goes back into paying the staff and running the center. No one person disproportionately benefits. And I was in this We Care was a for-profit center, and I was there a number of years. I started when I was 3, with, like I said, a few mornings a week. And then where I live, you start kindergarten when you're 4. And back then it was every other day. Actually, I think when I was in JK, it was half day every day. And then when I was in SK, senior kindergarten, it was switched to all day every other day. But either way, for those 2 years, I went to daycare part time and school part time because now my mom was working. And then from grades 1 to 3, I attended We Care after school because, again, my mom was at work. And it's very, very interesting that I never really had a lot of behavior, that no one really ever picked up much. I think some staff had some suspicions because I remember looking back, there seemed to be 2 or 3 other kids who also had behavior issues, and I do feel like sometimes the staff clumped us together. And I think by the time I was 8, I was starting to suspect I might be different, although at that point it wasn't a big thing. Um, and when I return chronologically to those ages, you'll hear more. But yeah, it's interesting. A lot of Aspies would not do well outside the unstructured environment of a classroom. Or I was the opposite. I was happy. I could sit and read a book. I could do my own thing. When I was younger, I played with the other kids pretty well. And like I said, the staff were kind of mean. So they threatened to make you clean the floor with a toothbrush. Is going to put all but the toughest kids in line. So, and then ditto when I switched daycares for 2 years when I was 9 and 10. We moved across town, so I switched schools, and I attended a different daycare for after-school care for those 2 years. For-profit center, beautiful center, night and day. But again, not really a lot of behavior. I would come from school. Sometimes I would do my homework or sit and read a book. If I did play with the other kids, it tended to be kids a little bit younger than me. By that point, their social emotional development, had overtaken mine. So I would go for kids who were younger than me because they were easier to relate to. But again, I really don't think the staff suspected anything was up with me. Um, I'm not sure entirely what they knew about what was going on in school, which you'll learn about. But yeah, it's interesting that in daycare, and same goes for summer day camps. I attended summer day camps as a child. My mom worked. I'm single. She worked 8 to 5, so usually from 7:30 to 5:30. From the ages of 6 through 12, I would be at a town-run summer day camp for the summer, and I don't remember ever really minding it. It just was. It was what I did. I like a kid. A lot of kids accept things pretty easily, and kids, this is what they know, so they go along with it. And that was me. I didn't know any difference. I went to summer day camp. Again, I don't remember a lot of behavior issues. Maybe one or two little outbursts when I was a bit younger, but it's still a lot more free to do your own thing than school. So a lot of the issues that came up in school just weren't there. And when I discuss school, it'll make sense. And for me, it was the opposite of other Aspies, where I did better in this unstructured environment. I was able to, there were still activities. I mean, it wasn't complete free for all. There were still planned activities, but it's just not the same as school. I sit down, shut up, and do this. Um, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is kindergarten, which follows chronologically because I talked about the first 3 years of my life. So now I'll end up with kindergarten, which is ages 4 and 5, where I live. So I did kindergarten. Sorry, I had kindergarten with the same teacher for both junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten. And both years she had a baby went on maternity leave. And back then, maternity leave in Canada was 6 months. So both my kindergarten years, I had the teacher at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and a different teacher for 6 months in the middle when she was off on maternity leave. And it was this teacher who covered the maternity leave, who's was one of the first to point out some issues with me. This teacher had been teaching maybe 30 years, or possibly more than that even. So she had a good deal of experience with children, and she developed that intuitive feel for when something's not quite right. And she brought up some concerns to my mom about my anxiety. About apparently I wore a new dress to school, and one day, and that's all I would talk about the entire day. And it's normal for children to get stuck on things. That's how they learn, by repetition and talking and talking and asking and asking. But this was beyond that. This was literally all I could think about all day was this dress. And now this is what I've been told. I don't recall this. And this teacher also expressed concern about my being afraid of thunderstorms and how I would freak out when the sky got dark because I was convinced there'd be a thunderstorm. So she was one of the first ones to bring up some concerns. And I do remember some behavior more in senior kindergarten. In senior kindergarten, I was in a split class with JKs, and I bullied one of the girls in the JK age range. Or she was 4, I was 5. I bullied her actually pretty severely, and I remember some of it. I can't tell you why I bullied her. Um, and I didn't realize. Obviously, I was 5. Obviously, I wouldn't have known the impact of what I was doing. Only reading some reports years later that I realized I'd made this child afraid of school. And I believe this child had developmental issues of her own. Looking back, she did not act like a 4-year-old. There were challenges with that child, I believe. For example, I remember she was afraid of the toilet, and she would rather wet herself than use the school toilet. And she still had a potty at home. She didn't use the toilet at home, which is not typical behavior of a 4-year-old, for example. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I feel that in some way that was a factor in why I felt I could pick on her. I don't know. I don't know. It's a complete mystery to me. But apparently it got so bad that the teacher put in a request for an educational assistant, which is an aide for students with special needs. But it was denied because at the time I had no diagnoses at all. And on that note, I'm going to end, and we'll talk about my next video, grades 1 to 3. And I received my first diagnoses in grade 1, although I believe now that they are incorrect. But I will pick up from there. Thank you.